The night the horror began, the clouds hung low over Raven's Hollow, a forgotten mountain town where broken streetlights flickered like dying stars. The wind carried the smell of rust and wet earth, sweeping through empty alleys and rattling loose metal on abandoned rooftops. Every building looked tired, leaning like old bones ready to collapse. Locals said the town was cursed, a place people arrived at but did not leave. A place swallowed by silence. For young filmmakers Leah Mava, Carter, and Mia drove into town just after midnight, their headlights cutting through heavy rain like blades. They came to record a documentary about the most feared location in the region. Black Ridge Tunnel, sealed for decades after 12 miners vanished inside one winter night. Their families heard only their screams echoing through the stone hall screams that ended suddenly. As though something cut off their breath. The police found no blood, no bodies, only claw marks in the rock walls. Claw marks too large to be human. The story became legend. People avoided the tunnel. Entire families moved away. Raven's Hollow became a ghost town with living residents, but legends attract those who hunger for the unknown. And these four had built their channel, exploring the unseen, unfacing what others feared. Their videos drew thousands of viewers, people addicted to terror, always waiting for the next warning whispered at the end. Watch at your own risk. What you see cannot be unseen. They rented a broken farmhouse outside town, expecting a quiet night before filming. But the house felt wrong from the moment they stepped inside. The air tasted metallic, heavy like steam from boiling iron. The floorboards sighed beneath their feet as if breathing. Every sound echoed unnaturally, like the walls were hollow. While unpacking equipment, Ava found a small bundle of old newspaper clippings tied with black string left on the dining table, as if placed there recently. The headline burned into her mind. Miners found screaming tunnels sealed after mass panic. Another article described survivors crawling out with frozen faces, eyes wide, mouths locked open in silent horror. Their hearts still beating, but their minds gone. None spoke again, and scratched beside the articles. In shaking handwriting, "Don't listen to the voices in the dark." Liam tried to laugh it off. But the sound died in his throat when a scream tore through the storm outside, a sharp, agonized cry echoing across the fields. A dog or something that once was. The scream ended too suddenly, cut short like a snapped wire. The lights in the house flickered once, twice, and died. Darkness swallowed everything. The storm outside roared like a beast, trying to break through the walls. Something dragged its nails slowly along the wooden siding. Long scraping strokes that made every bone vibrate, Carter whispered, trembling. "Someone's out there." But deep from inside the walls, a voice replied low, broken, not human. "Turn back. Do not open the tunnel. You were warned." Then silence. The silence that only comes before something terrible arrives. And they realized something horrifying. The warning did not come from outside. It came from inside the house, inside the walls, inside the dark, inside something waiting. And now, it knew their names. The storm clawed at the farmhouse like it wanted to rip the roof away. Thunder shaking the walls so violently that dust rained from the ceiling and coated the floor like ash. And in the suffocating darkness, the four friends huddled together, clinging to the single dying glow of Carter's flashlight. Its trembling beams slicing through the black like a thin blade. Every shift of shadow felt alive, every creak like a breath from something unseen. And then, from the far end of the hallway, they heard footsteps, slow, dragging, uneven, like bare feet sliding across wet concrete, approaching closer and closer. And with each step, the temperature dropped until their breath fogged in the air, as if the house itself were buried in ice. Ava whispered that they should leave, her voice cracking with fear, but before they could move, the radio equipment on the table unplugged. Lifeless seconds before screamed to life with a burst of static so loud it made their ears ring, followed by a distorted voice gasping as if drowning underwater, repeating the same fragmented message again and again: turn back, turn back, turn back, until suddenly it changed and spoke their names one by one, perfectly clear as though spoken inches from their ears. The flashlight flickered violently and then died completely, swallowing them in absolute darkness, and in that pitch-black void, Mia felt cold fingers wrap around her wrist, human-shaped but impossibly long. Like bones covered in wet, stretched skin, and she screamed, stumbling backward as the flashlight flared back to life for a split second, revealing a figure at the end of the hallway, impossibly tall, head bowed, body twisted like something broken and glued back together wrong. Its skin pale and tight, mouth open far wider than any human jaw could stretch. A silent scream frozen in place, eyes hollow and black like tunnels leading straight into the earth. The beam snapped off again, and in the dark, they heard it rushing toward them in a blur of scraping limbs and wet breathing, louder and louder until it felt inches from their faces. And Liam, without thinking, grabbed the house keys and yanked open the back door, rain slamming against them like nails as they ran into the night, sprinting toward the field, hearts pounding, lungs burning. Wind howling like an army of voices, the farmhouse behind them shifting with something moving inside. Something large, something angry, something awakened. They collapsed near the old rusted fence, gasping for air, watching the house windows glow with a sickly yellow light pulsing like a heartbeat. And then the voice rose again from everywhere at once, echoing across the storm, "You should have never come." The tunnel is waking, and they realized with horror that whatever was inside the walls wasn't trying to keep them out. It was trying to keep something else contained, something now no longer trapped, something waiting for them in the darkness ahead. The storm swallowed the world around them, rain slashing sideways like blades, every thunderclap shaking the ground beneath their feet as the four friends stumbled through the mud, desperately trying to find the main road. But the darkness was so thick it felt like wading through ink. And no matter how far they ran, the farmhouse behind them never seemed to grow smaller, its windows pulsing with that sickly yellow heartbeat light, as though the house itself was alive and watching. Carter shouted that they needed to reach the truck, but when Liam lifted the flashlight, the beam hit something that froze them where they stood. The truck was gone, not stolen or moved, simply gone, leaving nothing but deep tire ruts that disappeared into the trees like the ground had swallowed it whole. And before they could comprehend it, the wind twisted around them into a deafening roar, carrying voices, hundreds of them, whispering, crying, begging for help. The sound pressing against their skulls until Mia dropped to her knees, screaming for it to stop. Ava threw her arms around her, shaking, and through the sheets of rain they saw shapes forming in the field. Translucent figures flickering like projections made of ash and lightning. Dozens of them, some crawling, others twitching as though in endless agony. Their faces blurry, but their mouths stretched in silent screams, reaching toward them with shaking hands. And every instinct in their bodies screamed, "Run!" But the ground beneath them trembled, splitting open with a crack that echoed through the storm, revealing a black chasm beneath the grass, breathing warm air that reeked of iron and decay. And from that abyss came the unmistakable sound of metal scraping stone, like something clawing its way upward from deep underground. Carter grabbed Liam's arm, dragging him back as the earth caved in further, and they all scrambled backward. Just before the hole erupted in a blast of hot air that smelled like a tomb left sealed for centuries, the storm lights flickering wildly as an enormous shadow moved just below the opening massive, winding, alive its shape, too large and wrong to be human. And as they stared in paralyzed terror, the whispering voices merged into a single violent scream that split the sky. you were warned. Lightning struck the field, blinding white, and when their eyes cleared, the figures were gone. The voices silenced, and the hole sealed shut as if it had never existed, leaving only steaming earth and the echo of something colossal retreating beneath the ground. Shaking, gasping, covered in mud. They looked back toward the farmhouse, now completely dark and new, with absolute certainty that they were not dealing with ghosts or hallucinations or nightmares born from bad decisions, but with something ancient, buried for a reason, now awake, now hungry, and somehow connected to the abandoned tunnel they came to investigate. A place that locals never spoke of out loud. A place where people vanished without footprints or blood or explanations. A place waiting for them still. By the time the sun rose, the storm had vanished as if it had never happened, leaving the forest washed clean and unsettlingly quiet, every leaf dripping with cold morning dew. The air heavy and still like the breath before a scream. The four friends, mud-soaked, trembling, and sleepless sat huddled on a fallen log at the edge of the woods, staring at the abandoned farmhouse that just hours ago pulsed with impossible light, now silent and harmless looking beneath a pale gray sky, its windows blank like blind eyes, and none of them could speak for the longest time. Each lost in thoughts they were afraid to say aloud, until Mia finally whispered the question hanging between them. What did we see last night? Carter, the only one trying to hold the group together, insisted they needed to leave immediately. Hike the road until they found help, but Ava shook her head violently, saying that something was wrong with their location, that her phone's compass spun wildly through the night, that the road seemed to stretch endlessly no matter how far they walked, like the place was bending itself around them. Liam, who had been silent since the moment the ground cracked open, finally lifted his head, pupils still wide as if trapped in shock, and told them in a trembling voice that while they ran through the storm, he had heard something whisper directly into his ear, not through wind, not through echoes, but inside his skull, speaking in a voice that felt like metal grinding bone, telling him they had trespassed somewhere they were never meant to walk. As he described it, a thick fog crept across the field from the direction of the tunnel, rolling low across the grass like pale smoke, carrying a bitter metallic smell that instantly filled their mouths with the taste of blood. And when the fog touched the farmhouse walls, the wood began to rot and peel, black veins spreading across the surface as if the house itself were decomposing in seconds, boards splitting with soft wet cracks that made Mia cover her ears in horror. Then they heard at the low, distant rumble of something shifting beneath the earth, not like thunder, but like stone grinding on stone. The same subterranean movement they felt last night when the hole opened, and the sound grew louder, closer, vibrating through the soil beneath their feet until the ground trembled again, sending birds bursting from the trees in frantic flocks. Ava clutched Carter's arm, begging them not to go near the fog, but Liam stood slowly, staring at the drifting white cloud with the expression of a man sleepwalking toward a grave, whispering that he saw shapes moving inside it, silhouettes pacing just behind the mist, tall and thin and crooked, too long to be human, their joints bending wrong, like puppets pulled by broken strings. And before anyone could stop him, he stepped toward it, drawn forward as if hooked by invisible hands. The others rushed to grab him, screaming his name. But the moment Carter's fingers brushed Liam's jacket, the fog lashed outward like a living thing, a violent whip of freezing air that knocked all three backwards onto the wet grass, leaving Liam standing inches from the fog's edge, staring at something they could not see. His voice hollow and empty as he said, "They're waiting for us." The moment Liam spoke those words, a wave of paralyzing dread washed through the group. An instinct older than language, screaming that whatever waited inside that fog was not meant for human eyes. And for a moment, no one moved, as if the air itself thickened into something solid, pressing against their chests and stealing breath. Carter forced himself up first, grabbing Mia and Ava by the wrists and pulling them back toward the tree line. His voice cracking as he begged them to run, but instead of following him, both women stared transfixed at Liam, who now stood completely still. Arms loose at his sides, eyes rolled upward so only the whites showed. His body swaying like a puppet held by invisible strings. And then a deep vibration pulsed through the ground again, stronger this time, making the soil ripple and crack beneath their feet, sending a swarm of beetles erupting from the earth like living black tar. The fog swelled forward, swallowing the lower half of Liam's legs, and he didn't even flinch as the mist wrapped around him like hands pulling him downward, his shoes sinking into the dirt as if the ground had turned to liquid. And he began whispering, rapid, frantic, words tumbling over each other in a language none of them recognized, guttural and sharp like stones scraping steel. A hideous sound that made blood rush from Mia's nose as she clamped her palms against her ears, screaming for him to stop. Ava sobbed uncontrollably, trying to reach for Liam, but collapsing to her knees as the pressure in the air grew unbearable. The world tightening into a high-pitched ringing that drowned out every other sound. And Carter, shaking violently, dug his fingers into the bark of a tree to keep himself upright, yelling Liam's name over and over until his voice broke. But Liam's body only bent farther backward, spine arching at an unnatural angle, his jaw unhinging too wide for a human mouth as the whispering tore from his throat in a violent roar that didn't sound like a voice at all, but like metal screaming against metal. Suddenly, the fog exploded upward in a violent spiral, dragging Liam off the ground as if lifted by invisible claws, his limbs twitching wildly, eyes wide and empty. And then the mist collapsed in on itself like a dying flame silence, swallowing everything, leaving nothing where Liam had stood. Not even footprints, just a scorched circle of blackened earth smoking like something burned from within. Mia collapsed into the wet grass, sobbing uncontrollably, whispering that they should never have come here, that something ancient was beneath them, angry and awake. And Ava rocked back and forth, whispering prayers between gasps, her voice shaking as she repeated the same sentence again and again. It wants more than one. Behind them, from the abandoned farmhouse, a door slammed open with explosive force. Wood splintering and a low guttural moan rolled out, vibrating through the air like the calling of something huge and starving. And Carter faced gray with Tara knew then that running wouldn't save them anymore. Whatever took Liam wasn't done, and it was coming for the rest. For several long seconds after Liam vanished, no one spoke or even breathed, the world holding itself in a suffocating stillness that felt like the universe waiting for something to happen. And then the temperature dropped so violently that Carter's breath turned into frozen mist, his fingers numb as he grabbed Mia by the arm, dragging her and Ava toward the woods with a desperation that bordered on madness. Branches whipped against their faces as they stumbled through the trees, the forest unnaturally silent, not a single echo of wind or bird or living creature. Nothing but the pounding of their own footsteps and the frantic gasping for air. And then footsteps behind them, slow, deliberate, too heavy and too rhythmic to belong to anything human. Carter risked a glance back, and his stomach twisted into ice as he saw a silhouette materializing in the fog. Tall and impossibly thin, with joints bent wrong and limbs too long. Its head tilted to one side like a grotesque mannequin studying a corpse, and from its chest glowed a faint, pulsing light, the same color as the flash that pulled Liam from the earth, throbbing like a heartbeat that did not belong to anything alive. Mia tripped, falling hard to the ground, her knees slamming into frozen soil, and Ava scrambled to help her. But the thing in the fog began whispering Liam's voice, perfectly mimicking his tone, calling her name in a pleading cry, asterisk, Mia, help me. Please, asterisk, and the sound tore her open with grief so sharp she nearly crawled toward it, tears streaking down her cheeks as she begged the voice to stop. Carter grabbed her shoulders, screaming that it wasn't him, that it was something wearing his voice like a mask. But the whispering grew louder, layered with dozens more. Men and women and children crying out from within the fog. Voices stacked on voices like a chorus of the dead begging to be freed. The forest around them began to tremble, trees shivering like they were afraid, and then the ground heaved violently under their feet. Soil cracking apart in jagged seams that spread outward like broken glass, releasing a sickening metallic stench that burned their lungs and eyes. And from the widening fractures, thin, pale fingers clawed upward, dozens of them, reaching, grasping, writhing like the hands of buried corpses fighting to escape. Ava screamed, the sound raw and animal, and forced Mia to her feet, the two of them running with everything left in their bodies. But Carter froze in terror as he saw something in the fog's silhouette of face, featureless and smooth except for two deep hollow pits where eyes should be. Empty wells of darkness that seemed to pull all light into them, and when that thing blinked, the sky above them rippled like water and the trees bent inward as if bowing. Carter tore his gaze away and ran after the others. But as they reached a clearing and stumbled into a narrow dirt road, they heard the thing speak for the first time in its own voice, low, guttural, layered with countless echoes. A voice that felt like cold fingers closing around their throats. You opened the door. You cannot close it. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the woods in a white-blue flash. And for an instant, the silhouettes of dozens of figures stood behind them, motionless, watching, waiting. And Carter knew then that Liam hadn't been taken, he had been claimed, and soon they would be too. The storm outside had swollen into a monstrous roar, rattling the windows of the old farmhouse as if something enormous pressed against the glass, desperate to get in. Inside, the darkness felt heavier than night, thick enough that every breath tasted of dust and decay. Alina stood frozen in the hallway, her trembling hand hovering inches from the tarnished brass knob of the basement door, the same door that had been sealed shut for decades. According to every local rumor and every warning carved into the rotting wood by hands long dead. Behind it, faint scratching echoed, then something like quiet sobbing, broken by long, ragged breaths. She tried to convince herself it was the wind, or some animal trapped below, but the voice that followed erased any hope of rationality. It whispered her name with aching familiarity, as if it had been waiting just for her. Alina, please, let me out. The sound was wrong-warped, layered with something not human. Her heart pounded hard enough to blur her vision as the knob slowly began turning on its own, metal grinding like bones, splintering. The whisper became a scraping shriek. The lights flickered violently, and every framed photograph on the wall turned upside down at the same time, as if compelled by invisible hands. The house groaned, the floorboards bending under unseen weight. Alina stepped backward, unable to scream, as 5 deep. Claw-like gouges ripped through the wood of the door from the other side, fresh blood seeping through the cracks, spreading across the floor in a slow, pulsing river. And then the voice spoke again, lower, colder, hungrier. I remember you. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. It pressed against Elena's skull like invisible hands squeezing, forcing her breath to come in sharp, uneven gasps. She stumbled backward until her spine hit the hallway wall, splinters scraping her skin as the lights died completely, plunging everything into suffocating black. The storm outside raged louder, thunder shaking the house as though the foundations themselves trembled in fear. Then soft footsteps began to move through the walls, slow and deliberate, pacing just behind the wooden panels as if something crawled inside the structure, dragging limbs too long and joints bending the wrong way. The footsteps circled her, faster and faster, accompanied by a sound like nails scraping bone. Alina clamped her hands over her ears, but the voice pushed through, vibrating through the walls. Through her chest, through her teeth. "You shouldn't have come back, Alina." The voice was deeper now, layered with dozens of whispering tones, children crying, men screaming, women pleading. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall and felt it pulse beneath her skin like a beating heart. A grotesque bulge pushed outward from inside the wood, stretching it like wet clay. Forming a face mouth open wide in a silent scream, eyes hollow and black. It lunged outward violently, shattering the plaster and spraying dust into the air. Alina ran, blindly, tripping over torn floorboards as the face dissolved into a swarm of shadowed hands reaching through the walls, grasping, clawing, tearing splinters free as they stretched for her ankles. The voice boomed through the house once more, shaking every window pane. "Don't run. It's already inside you." And then, somewhere deep below, the basement door slammed open. The room seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy as shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally along the walls. The air was thick with an oppressive silence that screamed louder than any noise, suffocating and endless. Suddenly, the figure from the screen stepped out, a spectral presence that defied the laws of this world, gliding silently toward the protagonist with hollow eyes burning like embers. Time slowed. Every heartbeat echoed like a thunderclap in the stillness. The walls began to bleed darkness, swallowing light and hope alike. A cold hand reached out, grazing the protagonist's shoulder, and in that moment, reality fractured, plunging them into an abyss where nightmares weren't just imagined, but lived. Where the price of watching was far more than anyone could bear. Escape was no longer an option. The moment the cold, spectral hand grazed the protagonist's shoulder, an unbearable chill exploded through every nerve, spreading like wildfire beneath their skin and seizing their very soul in a vice of icy torment. The familiar room around them shattered into fragments, dissolving into an endless, suffocating void, a pitch-black abyss that swallowed all light, sound, and time itself. Within this void, the protagonist was suspended, weightless and powerless, trapped between the fragile line of existence and oblivion. The air felt thick with ancient dread, as if the darkness was alive, breathing, watching, waiting, haunting. Whispers slithered out from the blackness. Serpentine voices carrying twisted promises and forbidden truths that no mortal mind could withstand without shattering. Flickers of pale, distorted faces emerged from the shadows, their hollow, soulless eyes boring into the protagonist's consciousness with silent accusations and unspoken warnings. The crushing cold pressed in from all directions, a relentless force squeezing breath and hope from their chest. Somewhere beyond this bleak prison, a faint voice emerged, fragile and desperate. A ghostly echo of a tortured soul who had once wandered this nightmare and failed to escape. But no matter how loud the plea, the protagonist realized with dawning horror that they were no longer a visitor. They were trapped, consumed by the story's dark hunger, destined to become yet another lost whisper in the shadows. The void stretched endlessly, swallowing all sense of time and space, and the protagonist's mind began to fracture under the relentless pressure. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of ice, each heartbeat echoing painfully through the blackness as if pounding against a tombstone. The whispers grew louder, no longer distant echoes, but a clamorous chorus of agonized voices, some pleading, others snarling, all weaving a tapestry of despair and madness. They spoke in riddles, warnings buried beneath layers of cryptic phrases. But their meaning was unmistakable. Those who dared to watch, who dared to listen, were marked condemned to wander forever in the dark between worlds. In the distance, flickers of faint, shifting shapes began to emerge, ghostly silhouettes of those who had vanished before, lost souls snared by the same cursed tale. They drifted aimlessly, their faces twisted in silent screams, reaching out with hands that passed through the void as if searching for something unattainable. The protagonists tried to scream, but found their voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. Trapped in a prison where sound itself was a ghost, a sudden jolt threw them forward, and the darkness convulsed like a living thing, tightening its grip. Memories flooded their mind, fragments of past warnings ignored, signs missed, and the innocent curiosity that had doomed them from the start. The television's flickering screen, the cold, warning voice, the pale faces glimpsed in the corners of their vision, all pieces of a horrific puzzle that had led here. To the very edge of sanity, as the protagonists struggled to hold on to what little remained of their identity. The shadows shifted again, revealing a towering figure cloaked in darkness. It moved with unnatural grace, its presence swallowing the faint glimmers of light that dared to exist in the void. The figure's eyes burned with an otherworldly fire, intense, accusing, and utterly devoid of mercy. It whispered a single phrase that echoed through the endless night: "You should have turned away." Desperation surged through the protagonist as they fought against the crushing despair, clawing at the void with trembling hands as if trying to tear through an invisible barrier. But every attempt only tightened the darkness, pulling them deeper into the nightmare's heart. The realization dawned, cold and absolute. They were no longer just a witness to this horror, but a part of it, forever entwined with the story's malevolent will. Then, just as the crushing weight seemed unbearable, a flicker of light pierced the gloom, a faint, trembling glow like a dying ember struggling against the wind. It pulsed weakly, a fragile thread of hope in a sea of despair. The protagonist reached toward it, every ounce of their fading strength focused on that small beacon. For a moment, it seemed possible to break free, to return from the edge of oblivion. But the darkness surged back with a roar, swallowing the light and dragging the protagonist back into the endless night. And so, trapped in the void between worlds, the story continued to weave its dark web, each viewer caught in its snare, each soul a thread in the tapestry of eternal nightmare. The ember of light flickered one last time before fading into nothingness, plunging the protagonist back into the relentless abyss. Their senses blurred, reality twisting into an endless nightmare where fear was the only constant. The dark figure's voice echoed again, colder now, dripping with cruel finality. "You belong to the story now." Despair seeped into every fiber of their being as they realized escape was a fleeting illusion. Yet, even in this void of hopelessness, spark of defiance flickered within the faintest whisper of a will unwilling to be consumed. The protagonist's eyes snapped open to a swirling vortex of shadows and forgotten memories, fragments of their life flashing through the darkness like distant stars, each memory a fragile thread tethering them to the world they feared losing. The story's grip tightened, but so did their resolve. Somewhere, buried deep beneath the layers of terror, a seed of hope took root, a promise that even in the darkest tales, light can find a way to break through. The void had become a cage, but within its black walls, the protagonist's mind fought back fiercely. The seed of hope, fragile but persistent, grew stronger with every heartbeat. Memories, once blurred and distant, began to sharpen faces of loved ones. Warm sunlight, laughter that echoed like distant music. These echoes of life stirred something ancient inside, a spark of resistance against the crushing darkness as the shadows writhed around them. The protagonist reached deeper into their own will, pulling fragments of strength from the memories they clung to. The dark figure circled, its fiery eyes burning with frustration, sensing the weakening grip of its prisoner. Whispers turned to growls as the darkness lashed out, trying to snuff out the light before it could ignite. But the protagonist wasn't alone. From the depths of the void, faint, Ghostly hands, remnants of past victims who had resisted, reached out to grasp them, offering guidance, strength, and solidarity. Together, these lost souls formed a fragile network of light, fighting to push back the consuming shadow. Slowly, the void began to tremble, the endless blackness fracturing like cracked glass. The protagonist's resolve blazed a beacon against the dark, a desperate promise that this story would not claim them without a fight. The cracks in the void grew wider, faint beams of light piercing the oppressive darkness like stars struggling to ignite in a blackened sky. The protagonist's heart pounded with a newfound determination, a fierce will to survive that burned hotter than any fear. Every memory of warmth and life, every whispered word of encouragement from the ghostly hands, fused into a shield against the consuming shadow that sought to erase them. The dark figure recoiled, but quickly gathered strength, its form twisting and growing more monstrous, fueled by rage and desperation. It roared, a soundless scream that shook the void, sending waves of crushing despair crashing against the protagonist's fragile resolve. Yet, even as the darkness surged, the light fought back, fragile, stubborn, defiant. Around them, the ghostly remnants of past victims swirled, no longer aimless and lost, but united in purpose. Their once hollow eyes now gleamed with a faint light, a testament to their refusal to be consumed. They lent their strength to the protagonist, anchoring them to the remnants of the living world and the hope of escape. The protagonist's mind flashed with visions of the outside world, sunlight filtering through trees, the laughter of friends, the comforting warmth of home. These memories, once distant and fading, now blazed with vivid clarity, feeding the fire of resistance. Every heartbeat became a drum of rebellion, every breath a promise to fight until the end. But the darkness was cunning, weaving tendrils of doubt and fear that slithered through the protagonist's mind like venom. Whispers echoed with cruel taunts. "You'll never leave. You're already part of the story, forever trapped." Forgotten, the shadows tried to choke the light, tightening their grasp with invisible chains, summoning every ounce of courage. The protagonist clenched their fists and screamed into the void, soundless roar that shattered the silence and sent ripples through the darkness. The shattered void began to pulse with light, colors blooming where there was once only black. The figure of darkness faltered, its fiery eyes flickering uncertainly as the light pushed in, stubborn and bright. For the first time, the protagonist felt the cold grip loosen, the walls of the nightmare trembling. The story was fighting back, and so were they. In this battle between light and shadow, the fate of the soul hung in the balance. The darkness shrieked in fury as the fragile light surged, fracturing the void into shards of glowing brilliance. The protagonist felt the crushing weight of despair began to lift, replaced by an overwhelming rush of clarity and strength. Every heartbeat became a battle cry, every breath a step toward freedom. The ghostly hands that had once merely reached now clasped firmly, pulling the protagonist upward from the abyss, tethering them back to the world of the living. The shadow figure recoiled, its form unraveling, its fiery eyes dimming into nothingness. It bellowed one final curse, a promise that the story would never forget them, that the darkness would always linger in the corners of their mind, waiting for another chance. But the protagonist was no longer afraid. They had faced the void, stared into the abyss of forgotten souls, and emerged reborn. With a blinding flash, the void shattered completely, and the protagonist found themselves gasping for air in a room bathed in dawn's soft light. The old television screen was dark, silent, as if the nightmare had been nothing but a dream. Yet the lingering chill on their skin, the faint echo of whispered warnings, told a different story, one that would haunt their nights and shadow their days. But now, armed with the memory of survival and the strength forged in darkness, they understood the truth. Some stories are meant to warn, to terrify but also to remind us of the light we carry within. And no matter how deep the shadows may reach, hope is the one thing that darkness can never steal.